Chapter 1. The Strong Girl. The eastern sky held just enough light to separate the scaffolding from the haze when Amara reached the seventh floor. Her arms burned pleasantly beneath the cooler she carried, water sloshing against the plastic with each step. Behind her, the first diesel trucks were rolling through the site gates, their fumes threading through the skeletal bones of what would become Oasis Eye Tower. Bala Adeyemi stood near the material hoist, clipboard tucked under one arm, watching her approach. He was a compact man with a face like cracked leather, 40 years of Lego sun baked into his skin. He said nothing as she set the cooler down and peeled back the cloth wrapping her cassava bread. "That girl moves like a crane," he muttered to Chidi, the safety officer beside him. "One day she'll break something just by standing on it." Chidi grunt-led in response, not looking up from his own checklist. Amara pretended not to hear. She bit into the bread, chewed slowly, let the starch settle her stomach before the real work began. The tower rose around her in tiers of rebar and concrete, floor upon empty floor stretching toward a sky that promised another brutal day. When she finished eating, she rolled her shoulders and walked to the rebar pile. The steel was cold and rough beneath her palms. She gripped a bundle, 6 rods, each 12 feet long, and lifted. The weight distributed across her back like something natural, like an extension of her spine. She carried it to the western corner where the concrete pour waited, set the bundle down without a sound, returned for more. Her rhythm found itself quickly: lift, carry, set, lift, carry, set. The sun climbed higher, turning the dust between the scaffold levels to gold, and still she worked. Her hands knew these motions better than they knew rest. From across the unfinished floor, voices drifted toward her. Be like Mano," Kunle said, loud enough that he wanted her to hear. "Na so the girl strong pass everybody," Tunde added, and both boys laughed. Segun said nothing, just watched, his expression harder to read than the other two. Amara kept working. She had learned this years ago in Amare in the village school on her mother's farm when the other children first started calling her Strong Girl. The name had teeth then, biting into her chest every time they said it. By now the teeth had dulled. Or maybe she had simply grown thicker skin. In Amare, they called me Strong Girl like it was a curse. Here in Lagos, it's just a fact. But facts don't make you welcome. She drove a binding wire into place with 3 sharp twists of her wrist, securing the rebar grid. The motion was automatic, requiring no thought. Her mind drifted instead to the apartment she shared with 4 other women in Ajagunle, the thin walls, the shared toilet down the hall, to the pay that barely covered transport and food. To the way the site manager looked at her sometimes like she was a problem to be solved, rather than a worker to be used. Kunle and Tunde moved on to other topics, their attention drifting to a girl from Oyengo who worked in the canteen. Amara grateful for the silence that followed, she wiped her forehead with her sleeve, looked out at the city spreading beyond the construction site, to the glass towers of Victoria Island, the brown haze hanging over the water, the ferries crawling across the lagoon. Somewhere in all that steel and glass sat the offices of men who would never set foot on a site like this. Somewhere, but not here, not in the dust, not on the 7th floor, where the only thing that mattered was the weight in her hands and the rhythm of her work. She lifted another bundle of rebar and walked toward the waiting concrete. The site office hummed with the same tired light that made everything look pale and patient. Amara stood on the stair, landing a level below, fingers still dusty from the last bundle, and watched the corrugated door swing as a black Range Rover sighed into the compound. Fluorescent strips buzzed, humidity pressed at her shirt, coffee cut through the dust like a promise. Bala came forward, palms flat, voice sharpening. "Oga, welcome, welcome. We day pray say the slab go hold," he said, chest puffing with the ceremony of duty. A man in a pale linen shirt stepped out. Ethan Owaisisai carried no weight in his shoulders, only attention. Chisholm, project manager, late 30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, crisp blouse, clipboard already under her arm, scanned the site with a quick, efficient sweep that left no loose ends, 2 weeks to the top pour, and a client who wanted perfection. "Morning," Ethan said, shoes quiet on gravel. He looked like a photograph. Clean-cut, tailored trousers, a crease that refused to fray. His eyes moved past Bala's wide welcome to the skeleton above. Chisholm brushed dust from the edge of her clipboard, voice low enough to be private and sharp enough to be true. "She's our strongest laborer." "No complaints, no drama," she said, thumb tracing the schedule. Ethan's gaze didn't shift. He watched the upper levels as if reading a page he'd never seen before. Bala straightened, grin fixed like mortar. Come inside, Oga. Make yourself comfortable, he insisted, stepping aside as if clearing a path not only through the office but through the business of reputation. Just a quick tour, Ethan said. Show me where the action is. Chisholm nodded once, efficient. Active floors are clear. We can move fast. They climbed the temporary stairwell two at a time, metal groaning under boot and heel. Amara smoothed the sweat on her neck with the back of her hand and tightened her grip on the next rebars. From below, footsteps carried the sound of a different lifeless dust, more finish. They reached the seventh floor where the rebar lay like a ready argument. Ethan paused near the western corner, shadow falling across the grid. For the first few breaths, he was just another man inspecting progress. Then his eyes found her. She knew the look that men gave out here, survey calculation, a weighing that left no room for misstep. His was not that. He watched the arc of her lift, the way her shoulders accepted weight, the rhythm of the bundle against her back. "What's your name?" he asked. Amara didn't drop her shoulders. She dropped the wire instead, thumb working it tight. "Amara Enade, sir," she answered, voice even, words clipped the way work made them. "Just Ethan is fine," he said, offering the name like a small easing. She tightened the last twist and didn't relax. Her eyes did not soften. Something moved in the line of her mouth, a fraction of a shift, small and quick, as if a crack had opened in a shell and unclosed again. Chisholm watched the exchange from the stair, clipboard held like a shield, and said nothing. Bala hovered by the hoist, hands busy with protocol. "How far to the pour?" Ethan asked, eyes still on the rebar and not on the men fidgeting around him. "2 levels," Chisholm replied. "Formwork starts this afternoon." He nodded, a man with schedules and promises. His attention returned to Amara once more before he stepped away, a light that didn't leave the place where she worked. The fourth day Ethan came, the light had turned the color of old honey. Amara sat on a wooden crate at the platform's edge, legs dangling above the sprawl of Legos glass towers catching the last sun, traffic bleeding into the distance like a wound that never quite closed. Her cassava bread was hard, the kind that required patience. The tin of akamu sat beside her, cornmeal thick and pale. She didn't hear him approach. His shoes were good shoes, the kind that didn't announce themselves. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan asked. Amara glanced over. He wore a simple shirt today, sleeves rolled, and something about the casualness made him look less like a photograph and more like a man who could wait for an answer. She shifted the crate slightly, enough room without crowding. He settled beside her, not speaking immediately. Below them, the city breathed. A generator hummed somewhere in the compound. A truck reversed, beeping its mechanical complaint. "How long have you been in Lagos?" he asked after a while. 3 years, Amara said, chewing. "Give or take. And before that, Amare." "Small village, Niger Delta. My mother still lives there." Ethan nodded, watching the horizon. "What brought you here?" Amara finished her mouthful before answering. The question was simple enough, but the answer lived in her shoulders, in the way she'd learned to carry herself through markets and streets where people whispered. "The village is kind," she said, "but there's no kindness in being mocked every day for something you didn't choose." She meant her strength. Ethan understood without her saying it outright. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that didn't feel like waiting for her to fill it. He was actually thinking. "My father taught me that strength is a burden," he said finally, "but I think it's also a gift. People are afraid of gifts they don't understand." Something shifted in Amara's chest, a loosening of a knot she'd wound so tight she'd stopped noticing it was there. She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes held no pity, no calculation, just recognition. She returned to her cassava bread. The tin of akamu steamed faintly between them. "You work with focus," Ethan continued, voice easy. "Most people don't. They work because they have to. You work like you're building something that matters." "It's rebar," Amara said. "It's the skeleton of a building that will stand for decades. That matters." She didn't answer. The city lights were beginning to blink on below, scattered stars in concrete and glass. A crane swung somewhere to their left, its arc slow and certain. Ethan stood after a while, brushed dust from his trousers. "That composure you have, under pressure, with all the noise, that's rarer than strength. Remember that." He walked back toward the stairwell, leaving her alone with the city and the fading light. Amara sat for a long time after, the cassava bread forgotten in her lap, watching the towers glow gold and then red and then the deep blue of evening. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the cavernous basement, the hum of machinery fading as he made his way toward the parking area. The day had dragged on, but the late inspection was finally over. All he wanted was to get home and collapse into a hot shower. As he rounded a concrete pillar, a flash of movement caught his eye. Before he could react, a figure lunged out of the shadows, a rusted pipe wrench raised high. Ethan stumbled backward, the wrench grazing his shoulder and tearing through the linen of his shirt. Pain seared through him, but he barely registered it, his focus fixed on the man standing before him, rage contorting his features. "Faye," Ethan gasped, recognizing the lean, wiry frame of his former associate. Faye's resentment had clearly metastasized into something far more dangerous. Faye swung the wrench again, a wild, uncontrolled strike, but before the blow could land, a blur of motion intercepted it. Amara, the strong-willed laborer Ethan had been observing for days, had crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat. With shocking ease, she wrenched the wrench from Faye's grip, then used her own body to shield Ethan, absorbing the second swing against her forearm. Ethan watched, stunned, as Amara's muscles rippled beneath her skin, the impact of the pipe leaving a deep bruise but no break. Faye, realizing he was outmatched, turned and fled. Amara pursued him briefly, but the sound of Ethan's cry of pain brought her back. Ethan's shoulder throbbed, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage Amara had fashioned from her scarf. Adrenaline still coursed through her, but her hands were steady as she assessed the injury. "Hospital. Now," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. Without hesitation, Amara guided Ethan toward the site office, her muscular frame supporting his weight as if he weighed nothing. Ethan felt lightheaded, the events replaying in his mind, but the warmth of Amara's presence was an anchor, grounding him in the moment. As they made their way through the dim, echoing corridors, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the woman beside him. Her strength, her courage, her unwavering composure, it was all so at odds with the delicate, demure image he'd first had of her. She was a force to be reckoned with, and in that moment, Ethan felt a surge of admiration and gratitude toward her. The hum of the site office grew louder as they approached, and Ethan knew that once they reached the relative safety of the well-lit space, the reality of what had just happened would sink in. But for now, with Amara's steadying presence beside him, he felt a strange sense of calm, as if the chaos of the attack had been temporarily held at bay. Amara guided Ethan through the hospital's automatic doors, the fluorescent light washing over them in harsh waves. The emergency ward hummed with activity triage nurses in blue scrubs, the metallic clatter of wheelchairs, the constant beep of monitors. She flagged down a nurse, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins. The nurse, a young woman with tired eyes, quickly assessed Ethan's condition and whisked him toward a curtained bay. Amara followed, her steps deliberate, until a doctor, a tall man with graying temples and practiced hands, gestured for her to wait outside. Through the thin curtain, Amara caught glimpses of the examination. The doctor's fingers probed Ethan's shoulder, drawing a wince of pain. Ethan remained still, his jaw clenched but his breathing controlled. After a tense moment, the doctor announced the wound was deep but not life-threatening. The wrench had struck muscle, missing vital structures by inches. "You'll need stitches," the doctor said, reaching for a tray of instruments, "and antibiotics, plenty of rest." Ethan nodded, his face pale but composed. Amara moved to the waiting area, her body finally releasing the tension it had held since the basement. She sank into a plastic chair, her muscles aching from the confrontation. A nurse approached with gentle hands, offering to examine her forearm. The woman carefully unwrapped the improvised bandage, her expression shifting to concern as she surveyed the bruise already darkening across Amara's skin. "How did this happen?" the nurse asked, her voice soft. Amara met her eyes, shielding someone. The nurse's brows rose, recognition flickering across her face. She nodded slowly, respecting the simplicity of the answer. The wound was dressed in silence, the nurse's hands sure and quick. Police arrived as Ethan was being sutured, two officers, a man and a woman, their faces professional but not unkind. The female officer approached Amara with a notebook, asking for a statement. Amara recounted the attack in clinical detail. Faye's face, his build, the way he'd emerged from the shadows. She mentioned the muttered name, Ethan's name, before the first strike. The officer noted it down, her pen scratching against paper. "Attempted murder," she said quietly. "Possibly robbery, but the motive's unclear. We'll need to investigate." Amara nodded, her expression unreadable. By 11 o'clock, Ethan emerged from the treatment room, his shoulder bandaged, a prescription clutched in his hand. His eyes found Amara immediately, as though she'd been the fixed point in his orbit. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement. A threshold had been crossed. He stopped before her, his gaze searching. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" The question hung in the air. Amara hesitated, her pride warring with the truth. "I've been sleeping on the site," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's expression shifted, concern hardening into resolve.
You're coming home with me. Non-negotiable. You saved my life.
Amara opened her mouth to refuse, but the words wouldn't come. Exhaustion dragged at her, and the violence of the evening weighed heavy on her shoulders. She had carried so much alone for so long. Now, something in his steady gaze made the resistance crumble. She nodded, a single, small gesture. Ethan offered his uninjured arm and she took it, rising from the chair. Together they moved toward the hospital's exit, the night waiting beyond the doors. The penthouse doors slid open with a whisper, and Amara stepped into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Lagos spread below them like a circuit board of light, the lagoon catching the moon, the towers of Victoria Island piercing the night sky. Ethan moved through the space with the ease of someone who lived here, his injured arm held carefully at his side. Amara followed 2 steps behind, her work boots leaving faint prints on polished concrete floors that seemed to stretch forever. The apartment was silent in a way she'd never experienced. No neighbors' voices bleeding through walls, no vendors calling from the street. Just the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of the city, muted and far away. Ethan gestured toward the kitchen, all gleaming steel and dark marble, the appliances arranged like sculptures. "There's food. Help yourself whenever you need it." Amara nodded, not trusting her voice. The kitchen looked like something from a magazine, untouched, almost ceremonial. He led her deeper into the apartment, past a living room where a single sofa faced the window, past a hallway lined with framed photographs she couldn't quite make out in the darkness. The master bedroom appeared briefly, a bed that seemed to occupy half the room, its frame dark wood, its linens pristine white. Amara looked away quickly, as though she'd intruded on something private. The guest bedroom was smaller, but no less immaculate. A bed with soft gray linens, a window that framed the lagoon like a painting, a private bathroom with a rainfall showerhead and bottles of things Amara couldn't name. Ethan set down a small towel on the bathroom counter, his movements careful. "Rest," he said, and the word carried the weight of an order wrapped in gentleness. "We'll sort everything in the morning." She waited until she heard his footsteps fade before moving. The shower called to her like a siren song. The water was hot, genuinely hot, not the lukewarm trickle from the communal tap at her apartment. It ran and ran, abundant and endless. Amara stood beneath it, letting it strip away the dust and sweat and violence of the evening. The soap was soft, almost creamy, nothing like the harsh bar she'd been using for months. She worked it across her skin, watching the gray water swirl down the drain, carrying away layers of her old life. In the mirror afterward, a stranger looked back. Her hair hung wet and dark, framing a face she'd almost forgotten. The bruise on her forearm had deepened to purple black. A thin scar ran along her collarbone from a fall years ago. Her shoulders were broad, muscled, her body a map of labor and survival. She looked at herself for a long moment and something inside her cracked open. The tears came quietly, without ceremony, the release of pressure that had built over 3 years, over a lifetime of being too strong, too much, too different. She pressed her forehead against the cool mirror and wept. In his own bedroom, Ethan lay awake, his shoulder throbbing with a dull, insistent ache. The doctor's words about rest echoed uselessly in his mind. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he kept seeing the moment in the basement. Faye's face twisted with jealousy and rage, the pipe wrench rising. And then Amara, moving with the clarity of someone who'd made a choice. Not hesitation, not fear, just action. Pure, uncalculated action. He'd spent 30 years building a life, accumulating wealth and power, surrounding himself with people who wanted something from him. Board members who needed his capital. Associates who coveted his influence. Family who measured his worth in stock portfolios and social standing. He'd learned early to be careful, to calculate every gesture, every word. Trust was a luxury he'd learned to do without. I've spent my life searching for someone who sees past the money, and she didn't even know who I was when she saved me. The thought settled in his chest like a stone. She'd been sleeping on a construction site, carrying rebar in the Legos heat, eating cassava bread on wooden crates while he moved through his world in air-conditioned comfort. The disparity wasn't just unfair, it felt like an indictment of everything he'd built, everything his family had built. A woman with her strength, her steadiness, her courage, reduced to manual labor because the world had no other place for her. That would change. He wouldn't allow it to continue. Ethan turned toward the window, where the city lights blurred and refocused. By morning, he would have made his decision. Amara would not return to the construction site as a laborer. Her presence in his life was no longer a moment of gratitude or obligation. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. Chapter 2: Tests and Truths. Amara woke slow, the room unfamiliar, until the weight of the sheets reminded her where she was. For a moment, the plain sound of the city seemed distant. Then the memory of the wrench, the scrape of metal, and her own quick hands snapped the moment tight. She dressed in the clothes she'd brought back from the site, sweat-dark shirt, scuffed boots, fingers moving like they always had, mechanical and sure. The living room smelled of coffee and citrus. Morning light cut across the floor in a hard rectangle. Ethan stood by the low table, coffee steaming in a thick mug, a tray with bread, butter, and sliced fruit waiting as if a small, careful ritual had been planned overnight. His shoulder was wrapped in white gauze. He moved with a tight, careful economy that held attention like a thing kept in a glass box. "Good morning, Amara. Sleep well." She paused in the doorway, hands folded around each other to stop the tremor she did not name. Yes, thank you." He set the mug down with slow, deliberate fingers and gestured to the seat opposite. "Sit. Eat something." She sat. Food looked strange and soft. She picked up the bread and tore at it, small and clumsy. "I need to be back at the site by noon," she said. "They'll miss me." Ethan watched the movement at the table before he spoke. "I don't want you to go back." She looked up, the words sliding free before the thought could be checked. "I can't accept charity. This isn't charity." He folded his hands. "I want to hire you as part of my security." A laugh started in her throat and died when he didn't smile. "Security? Me? You were the one in the basement," he said. "You chose to put yourself between a weapon and me. That's training by experience. That's judgment that didn't hesitate. You earned it." Amara set the bread down, palm flat on the table, knuckles white. "I do manual work. I carry rebar. I don't He cut across her explanation with numbers. 400,000 naira monthly. Housing. A vehicle. Full medical coverage. Not a gift. A salary. She blinked at the figure as if it were a foreign language. "You're paying that for what? For someone who used to eat cassava and sleep on a building?" "A lot of people eat cassava and carry things," he said. "A lot of people are steady. The difference is choice." You didn't have to step forward. Silence, stretched traffic hummed distant, and somewhere a radio picked up a song before a hand shut it off. "It feels like charity," she said finally, low, like pity dressed as a job. Ethan leaned forward, the bandage on his shoulder pale against his skin. "Listen, the site pays you 40,000, yes." She nodded, jaw tight. "You're worth more than what someone's willing to pay when they don't have to look. This is recognition. This is work that needs doing. You won't be shadowing me like a servant. You'll train. You'll make decisions. You'll have authority when it's needed." Her hands found the seam of her sleeve. "Why me? There are professionals, trained men. You protected me," he said without preamble. People who had everything around them that night hesitated. "You didn't. I want someone close who doesn't calculate risk the way my board does. I want someone who knows how to act." The simplicity of the answer landed like a stone. Her throat worked. She thought of the sight, of the heat, of the men who joked and looked away. She thought of Amare and the wooden house that felt small but honest. She thought of the bruise on her arm and the thread count of the sheets she'd slept under. "I'll refuse," she said, breath steady, the shape of the word an effort. "I won't be a kept person. I won't." "And not kept," he cut in, voice flat. "Employed. Paid. Treated like anyone else who does a job. There will be rules. There will be training. You keep the agency." The pause that followed was long enough for the city to settle into itself again. Amara scraped the crust of bread with the tip of a knife until the crumbs gathered in a small pile. "All right," she said. The word tasted strange and private. "Thank you." Ethan's mouth lifted just enough to be a road, not a destination. "Don't thank me. Just do the work." Amara stood in the middle of the sprawling walk-in closet, fingers tracing the soft fabric of a tailored blazer. The garment was a far cry from the worn, faded shirts and trousers she'd worn at the construction site. Beside her, Ethan watched silently, allowing her the space to explore the new wardrobe he had insisted on. "These are very nice," Amara murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure I can A." Ethan raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "Please, try them on. I want you to be comfortable." Amara nodded reluctantly and disappeared behind the dressing room curtain. Moments later, she emerged, the blazer fitting her athletic frame perfectly. Ethan's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "It suits you," he said, his gaze warm. "You look remarkable." Amara shifted, unaccustomed to such attention. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up." "Not at all," Ethan assured her. "This is who you are, Amara. A capable, intelligent woman who deserves to be seen and respected." The sales assistant hovered nearby, eager to offer more options, but Ethan waved her away with a gentle gesture. Amara exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Over the next 2 weeks, Amara's new life began to take shape. Ethan assigned her a sleek white Range Rover, and she practiced navigating the chaotic Lagos traffic, Ethan's calm presence beside her. As she grew more confident behind the wheel, the grip on the steering wheel loosened, and Ethan couldn't help but notice. "You're not afraid of much," he observed, "but traffic makes you tense." Amara didn't respond, but the slight softening of her expression told Ethan that his words had struck a chord. In the evenings, they would talk, the conversation flowing easily between them. Ethan shared his vision for his business, his belief that developers had a responsibility to create spaces for all economic classes, not just the elite. Amara, in turn, spoke of her village and her mother, her words laced with a quiet pride. One evening, as they attended a corporate gala at a luxury hotel in Ikoyi, Amara stood near the periphery, her gaze sweeping the room with a practiced eye. Ethan introduced her to his colleagues as "my head of security," a title that felt both borrowed and earned. As the evening progressed, Ethan's hand found the small of Amara's back, a gesture of inclusion rather than control. When a drunk executive attempted to flirt with Amara, Ethan's demeanor hardened and his tone became clipped. "Amara is not available for your company," he said. "Perhaps you should get some water." Later, in the car on the way home, Amara turned to Ethan, her brow furrowed. "Was that protection or possession?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan's response was carefully measured. "Does it matter?" Amara's gaze held his, unwavering. "It does to me." Ethan reached over and took her hand, the simple gesture feeling revolutionary. "Then I was doing both," he admitted. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Amara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, a mix of uncertainty and something else she couldn't quite name. The drive to the Oasis estate was tense, the weight of Ethan's hand on the steering wheel betraying his unease. Amara watched the city lights flashing by, her mind racing with questions. What was this dinner invitation really about? She sensed there was more to it than a simple meeting with Ethan's parents. As they approached the towering white stone gates, Amara felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. This was a world so foreign to her own, a place of old money and established power. The security guards at the gate eyed her warily as Ethan's car passed through, and Amara couldn't help but feel like an intruder. The mansion itself was a testament to wealth and status, its grand facade and manicured gardens radiating an air of impenetrable authority. Amara followed Ethan up the steps, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet in the foyer. Chukwudi and Ifeoma Owasai greeted them in the living room, their expressions carefully guarded. Chukwudi's gaze swept over Amara, his eyes narrowing as he took in her athletic build and simple attire. Ifeoma's smile was warmer, but Amara could see the same evaluative edge in her eyes. Dinner was a delicate dance of questions and measured responses. Amara answered queries about her background and education, sensing the subtext beneath each inquiry. She kept her answers brief, unwilling to reveal too much in this unfamiliar territory. Toward the end of the meal, Chukwudi excused himself briefly, only to return with an envelope in hand. He placed it before Amara with a solemn gesture, the weight of his words carrying the force of a verdict. 10 million naira, he said, and a US visa sponsorship. You could start fresh in America, build a life that doesn't depend on circumstances here. The table fell silent, the air thick with tension. Ifeoma's expression suggested discomfort with her husband's directness, while Ethan's face flushed with anger. Amara stared at the envelope, understanding immediately that this was a test, a crude but effective way to measure her motives. Slowly, Amara looked up and met Chukwudi's gaze. "Respectfully, sir, I did not save your son's life for money. I saved him because he was in danger, and it was the right thing to do. The money you're offering, it insults that choice. I don't want it." Chukwudi's expression hardened, but Amara could see a flicker of respect in his eyes. He was not yet willing to concede, however. "You have 48 hours to consider," he said coldly. "The offer expires then." As they drove home, Ethan apologized profusely, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. Amara was silent for a long time, her mind processing the events of the evening. "Your father doesn't trust me," she said finally. "That's not unreasonable. He's protecting you." Ethan's response was sharp, his voice laced with frustration. "From what? From you? That's absurd." But Amara could see the doubt taking root in Ethan's eyes, and she knew that the test had succeeded in sowing the seeds of mistrust. The path ahead was no longer clear, and Amara couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay in store. In the days following the dinner, Amara moved through Ethan's penthouse like a guest, her presence muted, her smiles less frequent. Ethan caught her several times, gazing out at the city, her reflection in the glass a mask of distant contemplation. He tried to reach her, his touch lingering on her shoulder, his voice soft as he asked about her thoughts. But she'd turn to him, her smile warm yet guarded, and deflect with a light topic or a change of subject. It was not unkind, but it was firm, and it troubled Ethan deeply. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Amara spoke. "I've been thinking about what your father said, that I could start fresh in America." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. Part of me, part of me understands why he'd want me gone. I'm not from your world. I'm always going to be the girl who slept on a construction site." Ethan's grip tightened on his own glass. "My world is arbitrary. My money is arbitrary. What's not arbitrary is how I feel about you." But even as he said it, he heard the strain in his voice, the echo of his father's doubt. It was contagious, this fear of not being enough, and it was infecting them both. The following week, they were invited to another gala, this time hosted by a rival developer, Al-Haji Bashir. The grand ballroom was abuzz with whispers and sideways glances as they entered. Al-Haji, a man with a thick beard and an even thicker ego, approached them, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Ethan, my boy," he boomed, clapping Ethan on the back. "And this must be your new acquisition." His gaze raked over Amara, making her feel small and exposed. "Quite the interesting ascent you've made, my dear. One must wonder, does Ethan collect lost things like you? Or are you something more?" Amara felt the sting of his words, the room falling silent around them. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous, but Amara stopped him with a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. She turned to El-Hajji, her chin raised. "I am Amara. I am a woman who saved a man's life, and I am here because I choose to be." With that, she walked away, leaving Ethan and El-Hajji in her wake. The drive home was silent, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets, casting long, dancing shadows. Ethan reached for her hand, but she let it rest on her lap, her gaze fixed on the window. "Are you thinking about taking the money?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was hollow, echoing in the silent car. "I'm thinking about whether I'm good for you, whether my presence in your life is a net gain or just complication." Ethan pulled the car over, the engine idling softly on the side of the Ligosepe Expressway. He turned to her, taking her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "You are the first real thing in my life," he said, his voice fierce. "Everything else is noise. Don't leave because of other people's noise." But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing, its roots wrapping around their hearts, making it harder to reach each other. They remained physically close, but emotionally, they were fracturing, their love becoming a performance, a dance they were no longer sure how to lead or follow. The dining room smelled of lemon oil and warm bread. Sun cut across the oak table at 2:15, dust motes floating like slow promises. Amara folded her hands in her lap and waited for the warmth she'd chased since the hospital to be anything but a test. Ifeoma smiled, palms resting on the linen. You look well, Amara. Sit. The fish is simple grilled, nothing showy. Amara slid into the chair. Thank you, ma'am. Ifeoma lifted a fork, not to eat. You love my son. Amara blinked. Yes, I do. Ifeoma leaned back, eyes steady. Good. Then you know what love asks. It asks for more than possession. It asks for bravery and sometimes for letting go. Amara's fingers tightened around the napkin. Let go. Ifeoma cut a strip of fish, careful as if slicing a thought. There's a program in the States, Arts Administration. I researched it for you. She did not smile now. 2 years, visa sponsorship, a chance to build a life on your own terms, not as someone's companion, but as someone of your own making. Amara opened her mouth. Nothing came. Ifeoma set the plate down. Sunlight feathered her hair. If you love him, you might love him enough to give him freedom, to let him marry someone who fits the scripts Lagos expects, someone with the right family, the right schooling, the right stories at cocktail parties. Amara had heard Chakuri's money offer. This landed differently. It was quieter, surgical. Are you asking me to choose? She asked. Ifeoma folded her napkin like a small, deliberate pause. I'm asking you to imagine a world where the noise stops. Imagine him free of gossip and pity. Imagine your life without being defined by who you saved. Amara's throat moved. So his freedom is my exile. Ifeoma's gaze softened, then sharpened. I am a mother. I do not want his life narrowed by whispers. I do not want him to live with the constant calculus of pity and praise. Your presence changes him. That change will break things, alliances, business partners, even old friends. I have lived long enough to watch that breakage. Silence draped the room. A waiter paused at the doorway, hands folded. Amara pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood sounded louder than the words. With respect, Mrs. Oasisai, I will not remain in your home while you make a case that leaving is love. You dress fear as counsel. That is not love. Ifeoma's hand stilled on the table. What if I'm right, Amara? What if you're not enough? Amara did not answer. She rose, breathing through the tightness in her chest, and moved past the heavy curtains. Her footsteps echoed in the hall. At the door, she paused, hand on the handle. You could choose safety, Ifeoma offered, voice quiet and exact. You could choose a course, papers, a life recognized the world over. Amara's fingers closed around the brass. Or I could choose the mess of being real, she said. I will not perform absence, so the world will deem you worthy. The door clicked shut behind her. The drive out of the compound swallowed the sun. Traffic knifed through Victoria Island with its usual patience for wealth and impatience for truths. She parked at the lagoon overlook where the city sighed against water. The car smelled like leather and stale perfume. Amara turned the key and let the engine die, though the world outside kept moving. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel until the glass blurred and the lights of Lagos were streaks. No sound but distant horns and the steady lapping against the clay. Her hands went numb on the rim of the wheel. She did not cry out. She did not call anyone. She sat there until the light drained, letting something inside her unstick. The phone call came at 6:47 p.m. Ethan's voice cut through the penthouse silence like a blade. Where is she? Ifeoma pressed the phone to her ear, watching the last light slide across the dining table. She left. She left because of what you said to her. It wasn't a question. Ethan had always been the kind of son who read silences like scripture. What did you offer her this time? Another envelope? Another kindness with teeth? Ifeoma closed her eyes. I offered her a future. You offered her exile. The line went dead. Chikuri set down his glass. He'll come here, yes. Then we'll tell him the truth. We were protecting him. Ifeoma said nothing. The truth had a way of rearranging itself depending on who told it. The Range Rover pulled into the compound at 7:15. Ethan moved through the gates like a man who had stopped asking permission. Amara's car followed 30 seconds later, summoned by a text that simply read, "Come home." She found him in the dining room, standing at the head of the oak table where he'd sat as a boy, where he'd learned to speak in measured tones and measured silences. His parents flanked either side. The air smelled of lemon oil and something older, fear perhaps, the scent of a family unraveling. Ethan turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes found hers, and something in his face shifted. Not the controlled gentleness he wore for the world, something rawer, something true. "I know what they did," he said to her, both times. Amara stood near the threshold, arms at her sides. Her chest felt tight. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to explain, I'm asking you to witness." He turned to his parents, the room contracted around them. "You tested her. First with money, 10 million naira and a visa, then with escape routes, a program in the States, a chance to let go. Both times she refused. Both times she remained." Chokwudi straightened. "We were protecting you from the only exploitation happening here is you." Ethan's voice didn't rise. That was the worst part. He spoke like a man who had finally stopped being careful, using fear and suspicion to control my choices. That ends now. Ifeoma's hand stayed folded on the table. Her silence had weight. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of recognition. She had built walls around her son for 30 years. She was watching them fall in minutes. "What impossible standard are you holding her to?" Ethan continued. "What standard did you never hold previous partners? Explain that to me. Explain why the woman who saved my life is the one you suspect most." Chokudi's jaw tightened. "She has nothing, I have nothing to offer her that matters. She has everything I need." Ethan crossed the distance to Amara, his hand found hers. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my parents weren't worthy of your trust immediately. I'm sorry that I didn't shut this down sooner. But I'm telling you now, there are no more tests, no more conditions. You are not auditioning for my love. You already have it, completely." Amara's breath caught. Years of defensive posturing, walls built in villages where strength made her a target, in cities where poverty made her suspect began to dissolve. She had learned to expect the blade behind the kindness. This was something else. This was a man standing in the wreckage of his own family to say, "You are the foundation." She stepped forward, her fingers laced through his. To Chukwudi and Ifeoma, she spoke quietly but with absolute conviction. "I don't need your permission or your approval, but if you love your son, you'll choose to trust him. He has chosen me. That choice deserves honor, not suspicion." The room held its breath. Outside, Lagos hummed its endless song, traffic, horns, the distant thrum of a city that never stopped moving. Inside, something new took root. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the space where forgiveness could eventually grow. The silence stretched like a held breath. No one moved. The lemon oil scent had faded, replaced by something rawer, the smell of a household confronting its own fractures. Ifeoma stood first. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of motion that comes from deciding something irreversible. She walked around the table, past Chukwudi's frozen hand on his glass, and stopped in front of Amara. Amara's shoulders tightened. She had learned to expect the worst from gestures like this, the backhanded compliment, the polite dismissal dressed as concern. Her body prepared for impact, but Fiona simply took her hand. Not a patronizing grasp, not the way one might touch a servant or a child, an equal grip, palm to palm. "I was wrong." Ifeoma's voice carried no armor. "I was afraid. That doesn't excuse the harm I caused, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see that you love my son truly, and that your worth is not contingent on anything except your character. I'm sorry." The words landed somewhere deep in Amara's chest. She had imagined this moment 100 times, in her apartment, in her car at the lagoon overlook, in the space between sleeping and waking. In every version, she had rehearsed a sharp response, a dignified rejection. Instead, she found herself simply nodding. The nod didn't grant absolution, it simply acknowledged what had been said. Chukwudi remained seated longer. His hands hadn't moved from the table, but something in his expression had shifted, not softening exactly, but recognizing. He watched his wife hold this young woman's hand, watched Ethan stand protectively nearby, and the businessman's mind that had assessed Amara as a liability now ran different calculations. "I built my business on assessment and risk." His voice came out rougher than intended. "I assessed you as a risk. I was wrong to apply that logic to my son's heart." He paused, gathering words that didn't come easily. "Amara, you have my respect. I hope, with time, you'll also have my welcome." It wasn't love, not yet. but it was something solid, something she could stand on without feeling the ground give way beneath her. Amara nodded again. Thank you. 3 words, enough for now. The evening had deepened by the time they left. The sky had turned that particular shade of purple that Lagos wore like a second skin, the city lights beginning to compete with the last traces of sunset. Ethan held the car door open for her. In the driveway, the fountain continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded inside. They drove through the gates in silence, the Range Rover swallowing the Lagos noise until they were sealed in their own quiet. Halfway home, Ethan reached over. His fingers found hers on the center console and squeezed, gentle but firm, a question and an answer in one gesture. Amara squeezed back. The city blurred past windows. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blared. Someone shouted. Life continued its relentless push forward. But in this car, in this moment, something had shifted. Not fixed. Not yet, but shifted. I came to Lagos to escape being unseen. Her thoughts settled like sediment. I didn't expect to find someone willing to see me completely, and I certainly didn't expect his family to eventually choose to see me too. She leaned her head against the cool glass and watched the lights stretch into lines. Ethan drove with one hand, the other still resting near hers, present, patient, there. The road ahead remained uncertain, but the ground beneath her feet felt different now. Solid. Real. The interrogation room smelled of disinfectant and metal. A wall clock read 3:22 p.m., fluorescent light flattened faces. Amara sat with her palms on the laminate table and listened, everything else narrowed to the sound of a man unstrung. Faye Okonkwo, thin, wiry suit rumpled, hair starting to gray at the temples, sat handcuffed across from them. Arrested 3 days after the mansion fight, identified by footage from the construction site and tracked through old contacts, he looked like a man who had burned through chances. He began before the officer finished the formalities. You think you're special? You think he loves you? Faye spat, wrists twisting against the cuffs. He collects people like you, discards, lost things, and plays savior. In 6 months, he'll get bored and you'll be gone. That's what men like him do. Amara did not move her hands. She had never wanted this stage, the room stripped of warmth, but she met him with a voice cool and precise. I don't need your permission to understand my own worth. You're in handcuffs because you couldn't accept that someone else's success doesn't diminish yours. That's a choice you made. I chose differently. The officer cleared his throat and set a folder between them. He held measured silence like a weapon. Stick to the incident, Mr. Okonkwo. When did you approach Mr. Owasai in the basement? What did you use? Faye laughed, quick and hollow. I used everything they taught me, every little slight, every passover. I used the parts of me that never got a name. I wanted him to bleed. I wanted him to see what his money does. He drew breath and the confession tumbled, raw and punctuated by long, venomous lists, months of missed promotions, a contract lost to Ethan's company, jokes in back rooms that hardened into a map. He said he'd watched Ethan for years, watched doors open and faces turn, and the word nepotism, said like a wound, came out sharp and sustained. The officer tilted the file and steered the conversation back to facts, timelines, location, witnesses. He asked Faye to describe the weapon, the sequence, the intent. Faye did. He described the pipe wrench in detail, how he had waited in the shadowed car park, how the strike to the shoulder had been meant to break bones, not merely frighten. The word intent hung in the room like a verdict. Ethan watched without flinching outwardly. He answered the officer's questions about sequence and had handed over his phone in the security feed. He explained the earlier business disputes in the clipped language of an executive who knew procedure. But when Faye turned his face toward Ethan and named the root envy bypassed resumes, doors opened by family ties, Ethan's jaw worked. Amara watched him. She had seen him steadier and she had seen him laugh at things that hadn't struck her as funny. Now his fingers tapped the table once, twice, then stopped. He did not look away from Faye, but his eyes traced a line between the arresting officer's notes and the clean copy of his own life, projects, charities, branded apologies. The connections assembled behind his eyes, deliberate and cruel in their logic. After the officer signed off on more statements, the formalities ended and the room released them like a gate. In the hallway, air felt louder. The city pressed beyond the glass. Are you all right? Amara asked, voice small only by comparison. Ethan leaned against the wall, one hand flattening against the cool tile. No, not entirely. I'm realizing that my privilege insulated me from understanding how my success might harm others. Faye's wrong to attack me, but he's not wrong about the systemic inequality that made him desperate. He folded that sentence in like a piece of new information, something to be catalogued. They walked toward the exit. The officer waved them past without another glance. Outside, Yaba's heat hit them. Traffic roared, a motorcycle threaded a gap. The city moved as if nothing had sharpened the day. Amara kept her hand at her side, watching Ethan gather himself. The admission landed as a fact between them, plain, heavy, necessary. They moved together through the crowd. The next decisions were not yet spoken. Weeks passed in the rhythm of healing. Feo Conquo sat in a cell charged with attempted murder and assault. The trial date was set for 3 months out. Ethan had made calls. Not to bury the man, but to ensure the investigation was thorough and fair. He refused to seek excessive punishment despite having every legal right to do so. Amara noticed this and said nothing, but she understood. Revenge would cost Ethan more than it would give. Their relationship deepened into something unshakable. They moved through routines of intimacy, shared showers where steam rose between them like conversation. Conversations that stretched into the night with Lagos humming below the penthouse windows, the casual touching that signified complete physical and emotional trust. Amara no longer startled when Ethan reached for her hand. She no longer questioned whether she belonged. Ethan began planning something significant. He visited Adad's workshop in Victoria Island, a cramped paradise of gold dust and magnifying lamps. Ade is a master craftsman whose hands carried 30 years of tradition. Ethan explained what he wanted, not a diamond, too conventional. A Nigerian sapphire, deep blue like the lagoon at sunset, set in white gold. The band would carry traditional Igbo motifs, uche symbols etched with precision, hidden meanings only they would recognize. You want her to wear your history, Ed said, not a question. I want her to wear something that understands her. Amara accompanied Ethan to the workshop the following week, though she believed they were selecting a gift for Ivioma. She tried on several pieces, pausing at one ring that caught light in an unusual way. She turned it on her finger, admire the weight of it, the way the sapphire seemed to hold its own glow. This one, she said, then immediately shook her head. No, I'm just testing, that's too much. Ethan smiled and made a note in his phone while Ed watched with knowing eyes. Amara continued her role as Ethan's head of security, but she had expanded into informal roles. She sat in on business meetings, offering perspective that surprised executives who had dismissed her months ago. She reviewed projects, asked questions about labor practices, sustainability, community impact. People noticed the change in Ethan. He laughed more easily, arrived present instead of distracted, let his guard fall in ways that made his inner circle take note. He seems like a different man, Chisholm said one afternoon, and Amara felt the pride settle in her chest like a warm stone. Ethan invited Nkiru Nadi to visit Lagos. Amara was apprehensive. Her mother had only ever known Lagos as the place that took her daughter and gave back occasional phone calls and money transfers. The thought of Nkiru seeing this penthouse, this life, this man, Amara, wasn't sure what frightened her more. But when Nkiru stepped through the arrival gate at Murtala Muhammad, her face broke into a smile that dissolved years. She embraced Amara so tightly that Amara felt the strength of her mother's arms, still firm, still certain. I can see it, Nkiru said, studying her daughter's face. You're no longer carrying the weight alone. Ethan gave them privacy. He was attentive without being intrusive, giving Nkiru space to acclimate to the penthouse, the view, the sheer excess of it all. On the second day, he asked if they could talk alone. Amara hesitated, but Nkiru nodded. They spoke for an hour. Amara paced outside the closed door, pretending to organize the kitchen. When they emerged, Ethan's expression was serious but open. Nkiru wiped her eyes. If you hurt my daughter, Nkiru said, her voice carrying the weight of every village woman who had ever loved fiercely, you will answer to me. Ethan inclined his head. I understand, but I believe you won't. Nkiru reached out and touched his arm. She's chosen well. On Nkiru's final evening, they shared a meal at the penthouse, egusi soup, pounded yam, fresh fish from the market. Nkiru told stories, young Amara lifting water vessels that should have required 2 people. Amara sharing her lunch with the neighbors' children despite her own hunger. The day Amara came home weeping because the village boys called her a man-woman, and Nkiru had held her face and said, their words have no power unless you give it to them. Ethan listened like a man collecting treasures. When morning came, Nkiru packed her small bag with the same quiet efficiency she'd packed for Legos. At the door, she pulled Amara aside. Your father would have loved this man, she said, voice barely above a whisper. He would have recognized in him the same steadiness your father had. Nkiru cupped Amara's face in her weathered hands. You have chosen someone worthy, my daughter. Be happy without apology. Chapter 3. The Candlelit Choice. Ethan told her they were driving to a quiet place to talk. The phrase carried weight now, after months of navigating his family's tests. After the gala, after Ifeoma's manipulation, and Shakwudi's money, after the long road to reconciliation. Amara studied his face in the passenger seat but found only calm. They left the glass towers behind. The traffic thinned as they moved toward the city's edge, then disappeared entirely as the road wound through villages and open land. The air changed, cleaner, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant water. Where are we going? She asked. You'll see. The sun hung low when they arrived. Ethan guided the car up a gravel path to a hilltop, and Amara's breath caught. Candles, dozens of them, arranged in spiraling patterns across the clearing. Small lanterns lined a path to the center, where a blanket waited beside a bottle of wine. The lake stretched below, glassy and dark, catching the last gold of sunset. Beyond it, Lagos glittered, distant, small, almost humble. You did all this. Amara turned to him. I wanted you to see something. Ethan took her hand. Come. They walked to the center together. The candles flickered as they passed, casting warm light across the grass. Amara felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. This man, this place, this impossible tenderness. The city lights jeweled the horizon. Ethan faced her, taking both her hands in his. When we met, I was searching for someone who saw past the money, he began. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of vulnerability. You didn't see the money at all. You saw me. You saw a man in danger, and you responded with courage. Amara's throat tightened. Since then, I've watched you refuse every condition, every test, every attempt to reduce your worth to a transaction. Ethan's grip tightened. You've taught me what integrity looks like. The candles swayed. Somewhere below, water lapped against the shore. I want to spend my life learning from you. I want to build something with you. Not a life that impresses people, but a life that's real. A life where you're never again questioning whether you belong because you belong with me completely. He released one hand and reached into his pocket. The ring caught the candlelight, a Nigerian sapphire, deep blue like the lagoon at sunset, set in white gold. The band held intricate patterns, symbols she recognized from her village. Amara Nadi, will you marry me? The question hung in the air. Amara stared at the ring, at Ethan's face, at the candles surrounding them. She thought of her village, the mockery, her mother's arms, the construction site where they'd met. She thought of every moment that had led here, to this man, this hilltop, this choice. Yes, her voice cracked. Yes, I will marry you. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. The weight of it settled there, real and permanent. The vertigo she'd carried for months, the uncertainty, the fear of not belonging suddenly resolved into clarity. She had been chosen completely, without condition. They stayed for hours. The candles burned lower. The night deepened around them, cool and soft. Amara leaned against Ethan, his arm around her shoulders, their warmth mixing in the candlelight. Below, the lake held the city's reflection like a secret. Above, stars emerged one by one. Amara watched them appear, feeling the stability settle into her bones. This was hers now. This man, this life, this belonging. Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple and she closed her eyes. The press release went out at dawn. Amara watched the notifications flood Ethan's phone before he'd even finished his coffee. Congratulatory messages from colleagues, business partners, old friends. The engagement announcement spread across social media within hours. Likes, shares, comments, the digital currency of Lagos society moving at the speed of light. By noon, the journalist's piece had surfaced. She found it alone in the penthouse, scrolling through her phone while the city hummed 30 floors below. The headline slithered across the screen. Billionaire's latest project, construction worker bride or philanthropic performance. The article dissected her background with surgical cruelty. It questioned how a woman who carried rebar on a construction site had wooed the attention of one of Nigeria's most eligible bachelors. It suggested Ethan's philanthropy had always been performative, and that his engagement was the ultimate act, a working-class woman paraded as proof of his benevolence, a redemption narrative he could wear like a badge. Amara read every word. The old fears rose like floodwater. Is this real? Am I enough? Or am I just a character in Ethan's redemption story? She sat very still on the couch, the phone growing heavy in her hand. The afternoon light turned harsh, exposing every detail of the beautiful room, the imported furniture, the glass walls, the life she'd been folded into. The ground had shifted beneath her again, and she didn't know which way was up. Ethan returned at 6. He found her in the same position, still holding the phone. The moment he saw her face, he knew something had broken. Amara, what happened? She showed him the article without a word. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. This is garbage. A tabloid hit piece from someone looking for attention. I'll have my legal team. Is any of this real? Her voice trembled but held steady. Or am I a project you've committed to now because you've announced it publicly? The question hung between them like a blade. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his features. You can't let these people answer me, Ethan. His silence stretched. Then, I don't know how to answer that. I've given you everything below. That's exactly what I'm asking. She stood, the sapphire ring catching the light. You have stability, resources, a name. I've had to prove my worth at every turn since the day we met. So tell me, when you look at me, what do you see? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. The distance grew over the following days. They occupied the same spaces but didn't touch. Amara moved through the penthouse like a ghost, her thoughts circling the same questions. The trauma of public scrutiny had cracked something open inside her. Old wounds she'd thought were healed, now bleeding again. Chukwudi called first. He visited her at the mansion, finding her in the living room where she'd once faced his money and his judgment. His face carried a weight she'd never seen before. I doubted you, he said quietly. I was wrong. He paused, collecting himself. I've built a company, a legacy. The only thing I'm truly proud of is watching my son choose someone of true character. You are not a project. You are a woman of exceptional strength choosing to build something with my son. That's not redemption for him, that's honor. Ifeoma came next. They lunched at a quiet restaurant by the water. Ifeoma's eyes were softer than Amara had ever seen them. I tested you twice because I was afraid of losing my son to someone I didn't understand. Her voice wavered, but in the process I nearly lost him. Not as a partner, but as a son who questioned whether his parents valued his judgment. You were right to walk away from me that day. You were protecting your own dignity. I'm grateful you didn't leave him in the process. The words helped, but they didn't fully heal the deeper wound, Amara's fear that she would always be perceived as grateful, as compensated, as receiving love contingent on performing worthiness. The evening of the family dinner arrived. Amara stood before the mirror in the penthouse, carefully preparing, not to perform, to ground herself. She wore the sapphire ring. She wore a dress of deep blue that she'd chosen herself, without Ethan's input, simple, elegant, unmistakably her. She was reclaiming agency in how she was seen. The ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that announced itself without apology. Crystal centerpieces, gold-rimmed plates, the low hum of conversations in English and Yoruba and Igbo weaving through the air. Amara moved through the crowd alongside Ethan, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the sapphire ring catching every flash of light. Chukwudi and Ifeoma had spared no expense. This was not merely a dinner, it was a statement. The engagement announcement had been printed in 3 newspapers, shared across social media, spoken about in boardrooms and beauty salons across Victoria Island. Tonight, the Iwasasai family presented Amara to their world. Speeches came first, cousins, business partners, aging aunts with knowing smiles. Each toast layered praise upon praise, Ethan's achievements, the family's legacy, the bright future ahead. Amara listened, nodding at appropriate moments, feeling the weight of 100 stares. Then Ethan stood. The room quieted. He gripped the microphone, and Amara noticed his hands were steady, but his eyes found hers first. I want to tell you who changed my life, not by accident, but by choice and character. His voice carried across the ballroom, clear and unadorned. Amara saved me the night we met, not just from physical danger, but from a kind of spiritual complacency I didn't know I was drowning in. Amara's breath caught. The words were not rehearsed polish, they were something else entirely. I had money and status, but I was searching for something money can't buy, the feeling of being truly seen. Ethan continued, his gaze holding hers. Amara sees me. Not my title, not my resources, but me. The room seemed to recede. There was only his voice, only his face. I've asked her to marry me not because I can provide for her, though I will, but because she provides something for me that's infinitely more valuable, the truth. The truth of a life lived with integrity, with courage, with a kind of strength that has nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with heart. He turned to face her fully. I love you. Not provisionally, not with conditions, not with gratitude that someday expires. I love you as the person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. Thank you for choosing me. The room erupted in applause, cameras flashed, hands reached for champagne glasses, but Amara heard nothing but the echo of his words, felt nothing but the truth behind them. Later, after the formalities had stretched into the evening, Amara pulled Ethan aside. Come outside with me, she whispered. The terrace was private, shielded from the ballroom's noise. Legos spread beneath them, tower lights, traffic snaking along the waterfront, the distant shimmer of the lagoon. I was afraid that this was transactional, Amara said, the cool night air calming her racing pulse. That I was being loved because of what I represent or what I did. But hearing you speak tonight, seeing how you presented me, not as a rescued woman, but as a woman who rescued you, it shifted something in me. Ethan's hand found hers. I'm not going to apologize anymore for being who I am. She looked up at him, her voice firm. Not because of your love, but because I finally understand that my strength, my humility, my courage, these are gifts, not curses. You didn't give me that understanding, but you made it possible for me to believe it about myself. He pulled her close and they stood together as the city lights pulsed beneath them, a living thing, chaotic and vital, the force that had brought them together and now held them in its embrace. Inside, Chuck Woody watched them through the glass. His expression had softened, the rigid disapproval of months ago replaced by something warmer. Our son chose well, he said quietly. Ifeoma, smiling, responded, he didn't choose. They recognized each other. The lake glittered like scattered diamonds as the afternoon sun descended toward the horizon. 3 months had passed since Ethan proposed on this same hilltop, but today the space had transformed entirely white fabric draped between wooden posts, rows of chairs facing a floral arch, candles waiting to be lit as evening approached. Amara emerged from the changing tent and the murmur of conversation ceased. Her dress was white ivory, but the fabric told a story. Along the bodice, tiny beads formed traditional Igbo patterns, spirals and crescents that her grandmother's grandmother had once woven into ceremonial cloth. The sleeves fell short, showing the muscles of her arms, the strength she'd never been allowed to hide. Her hair, free from the tight scarves she'd worn at the construction site, cascaded past her shoulders, anchored by gold ornaments that caught the light. Her mother had worn these at her own wedding 30 years ago. Enkidu sat in the front row, dressed in a deep green wrapper, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her sat 4 women from Enmiria, the village elder, and 3 others who'd made the journey. One of them, Adora, had once laughed loudest when the village boys mocked Amara for carrying water buckets heavier than they could lift. Today, Adora's eyes were wet. Ethan stood beneath the arch, his suit crisp, his hands clasped before him. When Amara began walking down the aisle, his breath caught. He saw her. Not the dress, not the ornaments, not the way the light caught her face. He saw the woman who'd tackled a man with a pipe wrench to save a stranger. The woman who'd refused his father's money. The woman who'd stood on his parents' terrace and declared she didn't need their permission. The woman who saw him. The pastor spoke first, the Christian ceremony straightforward and warm. Then the tone shifted. An elder from Ethan's extended family stepped forward, speaking in Yoruba, invoking blessings on the union. A drum began to beat, subtle, rhythmic, and Minkiru rose from her seat. She approached the couple, her voice rising in Igbo, speaking words older than the Lagos skyline, older than the money that surrounded them. She blessed their house, their children yet to come, their journey together. When she finished, she touched both their foreheads and stepped back. Amara's vows came without notes. I came to Lagos running from a place that couldn't see me. I was running towards something I didn't know how to name. When I met you, I realized what I was running toward. A person willing to see all of me, the strength and the softness, the scars and the hopes. I promise to continue building this life with you, not because I'm grateful, but because I choose you, completely. Ethan's voice was thick when he began. I choose you, not as a project, not as a redemption, but as the person I want to share my life with. I promise to keep seeing you, to honor your strength, and to build something with you that belongs entirely to us. The rings were simple bands, yellow gold, each inscribed inside with Igbo words. His Ridak meaning strength, hers Ridabu meaning belonging. The reception blurred in a rush of music and food and dancing. Bala Adeyemi, the construction site manager, stood near the bar watching Amara laugh with her mother. He'd known her when she carried rebar bundles up 7 flights of stairs. Now she moved through the crowd like she owned the room, not from arrogance but from a peace he'd never seen on her face. As evening darkened, the candles around the venue flickered to life, the same candles from the proposal relit for this new chapter. Amara found her mother on the terrace, away from the noise. The lake stretched before them, still and vast, and Piru took her daughter's hand. Your father always believed you were meant for great things. I see now that your greatness was never about status or wealth. It was about your capacity to love and be loved without losing yourself. I'm proud of you. Amara's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you, Mama, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. They held each other for a long moment. Later, as the sun dipped below the water, Ethan pulled Amara onto the dance floor. Their bodies moved together, easy and natural, two people who had learned to trust completely. Around them, the candles burned steady, and beyond the light, Lagos pulsed, a city of possibility, of barriers broken, of love that had found its way home. The Lagos sun blazed overhead as the crowd gathered at the base of Oesisai Tower. 1 year had passed since Amara and Ethan's wedding, and the building that had risen from concrete and rebar now gleamed against the sky, a glass and steel monument to ambition made tangible. Amara stood beside Ethan at the dedication ceremony, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The pregnancy had settled into a quiet reality over the past months, a life growing within her that she still marveled at sometimes in the quiet hours of the morning. The ivory dress she wore draped elegantly over her frame, and her hair, freed from the tight scarves she'd worn at the construction site, cascaded past her shoulders, anchored by gold ornaments that caught the light. Her mother had worn these at her own wedding 30 years ago. Inikiru sat in the front row, dressed in a deep green wrapper, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her sat 4 women from Amare, the village elder, and 3 others who'd made the journey. One of them, Adiora, had once laughed loudest when the village boys mocked Amara for carrying water buckets heavier than they could lift. Today, Adiora's eyes were wet. Ethan stood beneath the arch, his suit crisp, his hands clasped before him. When Amara began walking down the aisle, his breath caught. He saw her, not the dress, not the ornaments, not the way the light caught her face. He saw the woman who'd tackled a man with a pipe wrench to save a stranger, the woman who'd refused his father's money, the woman who'd stood on his parents' terrace and declared she didn't need their permission, the woman who saw him. The pastor spoke first, the Christian ceremony straightforward and warm. Then the tone shifted. An elder from Ethan's extended family stepped forward, speaking in Yoruba, invoking blessings on the union. A drum began to beat, subtle, rhythmic, and Nkiru rose from her seat. She approached the couple, her voice rising in Igbo, speaking words older than the Lagos skyline, older than the money that surrounded them. She blessed their house, their children yet to come, their journey together. When she finished, she touched both their foreheads and stepped back. Amara's vows came without notes. I came to Lagos running from a place that couldn't see me. I was running toward something I didn't know how to name. When I met you, I realized what I was running toward, a person willing to see all of me, the strength and the softness, the scars and the hopes. I promise to continue building this life with you, not because I'm grateful, but because I choose you completely. Ethan's voice was thick when he began. I choose you, not as a project, not as a redemption, but as the person I want to share my life with. I promise to keep seeing you, to honor your strength, and to build something with you that belongs entirely to us. The rings were simple bands, yellow gold, each inscribed inside with Igbo words. His Reed meaning strength, hers Reed Igabu meaning belonging. The reception blurred in a rush of music and food and dancing. Bala Adeyemi, the construction site manager, stood near the bar watching Amara laugh with her mother. He'd known her when she carried rebar bundles up 7 flights of stairs. Now she moved through the crowd like she owned the room, not from arrogance but from a peace he'd never seen on her face. As evening darkened, the candles around the venue flickered to life, the same candles from the proposal, relit for this new chapter. Amara found her mother on the terrace, away from the noise. The lake stretched before them, still and vast, and Kiru took her daughter's hand. Your father always believed you were meant for great things. I see now that your greatness was never about status or wealth. It was about your capacity to love and be loved without losing yourself. I'm proud of you. Amara's eyes burned with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you, Mama, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. They held each other for a long moment. Later, as the sun dipped below the water, Ethan pulled Amara onto the dance floor. Their bodies moved together, easy and natural, two people who had learned to trust completely. Around them, the candles burned steady, and beyond the light, Lagos pulsed, a city of possibility, of barriers broken, of love that had found its way home.